able to present today is a continuation by other means of a book that I just published. The book title is The Inconspicuous God, Heidegger, French Phenomenology, and the Theological Turn. And in that work, I offer a more positive development of this idea of inconspicuousness, which I'll try to explain a bit in a bit greater detail in a moment. And now I want to shift to try to address some of the negative socialities, so to speak, of the inverse of the inconspicuous God, which I refer to as the spectacle of God. So I'm trying to develop this now in more of a critical theory, so to speak. So the title of my talk today is The Counter-Spectacularity of Religion, or A Case for Inconspicuousness. And on my train ride into town, I thought of a second subtitle to complicate things even more, which is to say, or the dark side of imagination. So this is a second subtitle, and I'm trying to tease out some of these negative socialities of spectacularity in this sense. So what I want to do with my limited time is to try to float a slightly bombastic thesis, and that is directed at the usual suspects of quote-unquote postmodern philosophy, figures that have influenced me greatly in very positive ways. So I hope you don't hear my bombastic and heavy-handed critique as an overall critique of their work by any means. But I want to float this slightly bombastic critique, and I want to maybe draw a little bit more attention to this idea of the dark side of imagination and spectacle. And what I mean by that is imagination as a kind of interpassivity, what Robert Fowler, maybe you're familiar with his work, refers to as interpassivity, which is best exemplified in the idea of canned laughter on sitcoms. So when you watch a sitcom and you hear in the background someone press a button and you hear the canned laughter, okay, this is a form of being imagined for, something you started to address that in this presentation, Dr. Shapiro. So that's sort of the imagination, dark side of imagination in this sense. It often is understood that modern philosophy, that the means of developing logical distinctions and arguments in a clear way, often runs counter to religious experiences, the enchanting, shocking, and eventful nature of revelation beyond epistemological conditions. Yet in many ways, these two tendencies share more similarities than we often imagine, as both focus upon and seek to unfurl what shines with apparent brilliance and what shocks with eventful spectacularity. It today goes presumed that revelation is or would be surprising as a spectacle. As Guy Debord once critiqued, Western societies are obsessed with spectacles, and this goes hand in hand with certain theological and philosophical presuppositions and conditions, from religious spectacles to sacrifice and scapegoats. I wish to locate and describe particular aspects of the emphases upon a spectacular phenomenality, then develop a phenomenology of the inconspicuous in response to that phenomenality. It in fact is possible to define the word inconspicuous, or what often gets translated as the inapparent, German word unscheinbar, according to its etymological basis as counter-spectacular, so this root word spec in inconspicuous. After one, locating a particularly paradigmatic debate that reflects these tensions within the pejoratively named theological turn in French phenomenology and the work of Dominique Chanecot, I then, too, introduce Heidegger's notion of a phenomenology of the inconspicuous in order to demonstrate three reasons why inconspicuousness may be used to overcome this particular aforementioned problem of both A, a modern focus upon clarity and appearance, or obsession, and B, the emphasis upon religious experience and revelation as a spectacle. I then demonstrate three ways such a notion of inconspicuousness may be used to overcome this particular problem of clarity vis-a-vis spectacularity. This approach of phenomenology and conspicuous was initiated by Heidegger but never seem to account for ways in which modern philosophy, with its emphasis upon appearance and clarity, has a fundamentally sutured relationship with the spectacle. The former, the modern paradigm, and the latter, a contemporary, socially embedded theological form. The former, concerned with appearance and theoretical focus. The latter, insistent upon the unforeseeable, spontaneous, passive, and eventual dimensions of life. In a nutshell, the modern insistence on clarity is sutured to the contemporary postmodern insistence on the event. There are two senses at work here in the association between philosophy and clarity. First, when philosophers hear the phrase clear and distinct, they of course are reminded of Descartes, for whom those ideas or propositions are self-evident, indubitable, and capable of furnishing warrant for an argument. The proposition triangles have three sides is clear and distinct because it is relatively simple and self-evident. For Descartes, this is how consciousness grasps information, constantly sorting out the clear from the unclear, which also entails distinguishing the valuable from the insignificant. Such propositions lead to metaphysical certainty, adequatio, a kind of truth armed with an index of unquestionability that points to how clarity and truth are sutured to one another. Second, this clarity has an implicit religious dimension at work. Without belaboring the ontological argument, the clear and distinct idea of God reasserts Descartes' own existence and indubitability. Clarity of this perception becomes immediately associated with divinity, and I would say here, vice versa. The seemingly opposite, religiously intonated notion of the spectacle, or spectacularity, can be defined as the uncritical privileging of whatever automatically grabs attention with the highest degree of bedazzlement, and in a way that presents a certain building of reinforcing an overemphasis upon appearance. That is a big mouthful, and I'm going to try to unpack that a little bit. As Guy Debord puts it, the moral consequences of a society of the spectacle operates implicitly by a maxim that ascribes spectacularity with a certain divine quality. And he says, quote, what appears is good, and what is good appears, end quote. Although contemporary post-structuralist theory is quick to judge spectacles, and the proletariat who they claim are unreflectively beholden to an undisciplined clicking on flashy political fake news and the next internet fad, at the core of some of these philosophers' work often is a certain secularized typology of revelation. Being passively affected by the shock of the unpredictable is essential to Derrida's difference, messianism, event mentality, Deleuze's unpredictable rhizomatic lines of flight, Hannah Arendt's optimistic newness of natality, the core of Alain Badiou's philosophy, fidelity to the event. Even Marion's insistence that the unpredictable event shapes the core of his saturated phenomena. It's not just one of the saturated phenomena, but it shapes the entire core of all the 4 or 5 saturated phenomena. Or Caputo's claim that religion has the structure of the event, and that theology takes the form of its analysis. And most recently, Claude Romano's building of an entire phenomenological approach insistent upon the event, which he says, quote, upsets the hierarchy of the agent's objectives, the configuration of his potentialities, and his world as such. It is precisely in this very conflict between the twin impulses of philosophical clarity and theological unpredictability of eventhood that I would like to turn to phenomenology, an inheritor of Cartesian self-consciousness that seeks truth through focused description of things and their modes of illumination. It is not coincidental that phenomenology, with its roots phanestai, related to the Greek phos, concerns what shines or burns with obviousness, as in phosphorus. Yet total commitment to the clear, obvious, and illuminated, like Plato's cave dwellers stuck in passive stupor, runs the risk of abstract prehension and detailed attention that loses the textures of a lived involvement with that which is perceived. Stunningly paradigmatic of this concern regarding an approach to what does not appear clearly are the debates that began in the 60s with the usual French suspects such as Levinas, Ricoeur, Derrida, Henri Chrétien, and Marion. The debates reached a climax in 1991, being pejoratively dubbed the theological turn in French phenomenology. These thinkers' concepts led up to Dominic Janico's critique of there being religious wolves in phenomenological sheep's clothing. In short, Janico accused them of abusing phenomenological language in a way that is inconsistent with what Husserl referred to as a kind of methodological atheism. For studying pure consciousness, and with the goal of achieving a presuppositionlessness in our descriptive enterprises that does not hinder an accurate description of what appears. Janico accused them of presuming an idealist metaphysica specialis to describe an invisible hinterland that does not appear clearly and obviously to the senses. Of course, the same critique can be turned back on Janico's opposite insistence upon a methodological atheism, which could just as easily entail a different kind of a priori requirement by claiming that theological concepts putatively cannot appear for investigation, thereby once again limiting phenomenology's wide open horizon. Yet, Janico does raise reasonable caution. Taken to its extremes, the method can easily be commandeered for pseudo-physiistic endeavors or warrantless presuppositions. Thus, Husserl's golden rule of phenomenology, which is not to claim anything that we, quote, cannot make essentially transparent to ourselves by reference to consciousness and on purely immanental lines. In the end, Janico brings to climax a central double-bind to any phenomenology of religion. What is given phenomenological description must be presuppositionlessness, or presuppositionless, and not import upon its horizon what cannot be valid as putatively obvious. Yet, this methodological mustness may limit, via its presupposed telic end, what it is capable of achieving for thought. Method leaves phenomenology under threat of dissolution into epistemology and the de facto abandonment of the primacy of description. Yet a complete open-endedness allows any and all phenomena to be presupposed solus ipse without any accountability. Often overlooked within Janico's critique of these young French thinkers, it was what he called the core sick root of their work. They relied on Heidegger's phenomenology of the inapparent, or phenomenology of the inconspicuous, as I'm preferring to translate it, which, as Janico claims, concerns the non-visible, under which even, quote, the most audacious soundings stand permitted, end quote. Although over a decade later, Janico would briefly return to this notion, insisting that it's, quote, a new form of thought, as an oxymoron, a supreme paradox, or a disconcerting impossibility, end quote. This enigmatic approach did not formally appear until Heidegger's last seminar in Zeringen in 1973. And I want to read a short quotation from Heidegger. Could you let me know when I've reached about 20 minutes? That way we can have some time for discussion. Good. For Heidegger, quote, phenomenology is a path that leads a way to come before, and it lets that before which it is led show itself. This phenomenology is a phenomenology of the inconspicuous. Indeed, in conceiving, there is the gesture of taking possession. Here he's playing on the German word begreifen, so to grip, conceive. There is the gesture of taking possession. Yet that which sight takes into view, it does not conceive, it does not grip, it does not own and control. This is a rather ambiguous reference to a topic which already, by its very nature or idea, is ambiguous. So a number of questions can be posed. Are these phenomena inconspicuous phenomena? Are they, one, that which have not yet appeared, two, have appeared yet are obscured, three, never are to appear, or four, always already remaining in the blind spots of appearance? Where Heidegger remained opaque, I've tried to fill in some of the gaps by developing this notion further, then applying it to religious experience. It is very clear that for Heidegger, quote, the inconspicuous is by no means to be confused with the invisible, and that mundane things such as shoes and hammers and tools have the greatest potential to tell us about our place in the world, quote. So here I think it's important to note, most familiar with the theological term have seen this word inapparent or l'apparent. which in French translates quite well to the invisible, whereas the German unscheinbar, there's a very important distinction to be made between unscheinbar and unsichtbar. So unsichtbar translates quite directly to the invisible, whereas unscheinbar has an entirely different meaning. It's something in between visibility and invisibility. In English, we would refer to it as the wallflower, something that's fully present, yet for a temporal, short period of time has become absent. So here's my running definition of inconspicuousness, and I admit that it's a mouthful, but I'm trying to do justice to the idea, especially involving Heidegger's ambiguous usage. So it is a means of experiencing phenomena whose aspects of intelligibility oscillate between presence and withdrawal, specifically in a way that disturbs with a very unique ability. And here I'm drawing on this ending of Unscheinbarkeit. This Barkeit is a very strong, powerful notion of what has an ability to do something. It's a power or a potentia. If you've read Walter Benjamin, he loved the usages of Barkeit abilities because he was able to do so many things with words, as many German philosophers are proven. Okay, so what can disturb with a very unique ability the presumptions of both the spectacular and any vacuous, empty, or banal idea of unthinkability. So this is the backside or the dark side of the spectacle, so to speak, by overemphasizing, trying to get beyond the spectacle. You can also, as they say in German, fall off the other side of the horse and end up in this banal, vacuous, empty, non-thinkable space. So inconspicuousness thus is paradoxical, running contrary to expectation and resisting extraction from that within which it mundanely is integrated in the Lebenswelt. Some phenomenal experiences actively evade any attempt to be grasped directly, and they indeed require a broadened vision to be experienced precisely because they are integrated. And here I'd like to think of the Mona Lisa smile. The Mona Lisa smile is a perfect example of what is inconspicuous. If you attempt to use your foveal vision to really grasp and take hold of the Mona Lisa smile, it slips away. You cannot see the smile. The more you focus on it, the more it disappears from your vision. You have to experience it only from a peripheral glance, your conal vision, and only then can you see and experience the smile. So it requires some creative imagination. It is not given, the Mona Lisa smile is not given without co-creation. Any detailed description cannot be untethered, therefore, from its turn to recontextualize the experience back into its holistic context. Otherwise, we end up with a hyperfocus that births, somewhat ironically, a certain attention deficit to no longer see the thing in its life world or environment, thus ultimately losing a grip on the thing itself as it was given. Husserl's categorical sensible intuition distinction here is instructive. When I write with my pen, the heel of the pen, the blue, the ink, the cylindrical nature of the pen, this withdraws in favor of the pen in use. It's not a judgment, it's a state of affair in which I use my pen. And thankfully so, otherwise I would be assessed with the overflow of experience, the stream of constant data being thrown at me. Nietzsche referred to this as we can be thankful to be able to forget. Without the ability to forget, we're all completely stuck in stupor at the overwhelming flow of Hila, as Nietzsche referred to it. So leading up here to tasks for phenomenology of religious experience, I think there's three that stand out to be able to benefit from this idea of inconspicuousness. One, to develop concepts that do justice to religious experience and revelation as lived. Two, to probe the socially influenced notions of God's phenomenality. Three, to describe the types of evidence appropriate to religion's modes of givenness. And I'm going to sketch here three ways inconspicuousness could be used, and keeping in mind this aforementioned matrix between clarity and spectacle. One, religious experience can be used as an inconspicuous and paradoxical kind of unveiling. It typically gets conceived as only exceptional or superlative to everyday life, and thus our philosophical devices are employed to study it from a particular arc that conceives religion as a combination of a superlative and an activity conducted at an abstracted distantiation. For example, religion is experience of, for Otto, the greatest overwhelming holiness, for Eliade, the pure and untouchable sacred, or for Tillich, the greatest ultimate concern. It's that superlative nature to these theories of religion. Although these theories help discuss normatively some aspects of religious traditions, overemphasizing the awe and distance of revelation may come at the expense of forgetting the rejointing, the religare, of the sacred within the profane, and the way that a spectacular clarity-worshipping distance overdrives the experience in these cases. Inconspicuousness is a kind of lever that might help draw attention to the exceptional from within the significant, and the holistic embeddedness of revelation. If revelation is meant to be shocking and inherently paradoxical, then the content of this shocking should come precisely out of unexpected and non-spectacular things, places, and people. There is a saving power of the ordinary. 20 minutes, okay. And those of us not fortunate enough to have had spectacular supernatural experiences must find revelation among what St. Teresa referred to as the pots and pans, or the lowly kitchen assistant Brother Lawrence referred to as the common business. And I'm going to try to breeze through these final 2 points. Number 2, inconspicuousness is a means of describing the kind of social explanatory power or evidence unique to such religious experience. Usually evidence is achieved by isolating information relevant to an experience or phenomenon, then applying it back to the whole context to learn something new about it. This is what we do in a court of law with evidence. Yet in the case of religious experiences, it seems the means to attaining evidences of phenomenality operates by seeking what cannot be isolated from the whole. Experience, the means of grasping from within this steady stream of consciousness, takes on a different sense when it becomes religious, insofar as it describes meaningfulness without total comprehension. Third, inconspicuousness is a means of characterizing God. One of the most often relied upon character traits of God is invisibility or hiddenness, often leading to God's unthinkability. For example, Schellenberg's popular hiddenness of God argument hinges upon this to prove God's non-existence, suggesting that this hiddenness of God contradicts God as all living. Yet in thinking with Levinas and his of God who comes to mind, is not hiddenness itself a phenomenon, and more than a total privation? Concluding, overemphasizing the shockingly spectacular eventhood, unpredictability, or enchantment of religious experience may leave its subjects in a strangely passive state. Yet, a surgeon-like precision that demands that all experiences fit into the model of direct appearance and clarity often lack attention to the ethical texture or life world of presentation. Our contemporary society obsessed with spectacles and its entanglement in implicit theological imaginaries is not simply antithetical to philosophical clarity, but also its product. The hopes for philosophical clarity and distinction inadvertently played a role in birthing what intuitively seems to be its opposite, yet in fact is its product, our contemporary society of spectacle, obsessed with images and illusions. Today we live with the fundamental anxiety that we're always one click away from missing the essential, with the information not being in the form of words, but rather of images, appearing. Is there any salvation to be found from the spectacle? And this is a question that Guy Debord also poses. Is it perhaps also the case that theologies overemphasizing St. Paul's being knocked down from the horse in an event of revelation also may be to blame for insisting that revelation needs to be spectacular? If there is any salvation to be found, I'm not convinced it will come from the invisible or what does not shine, but in what counter-shines, the inconspicuous, precisely as the counter-spectacular, which points to how it is not simply a passive privation, but rather a dynamic force and ability. This counter-spectacularity could mark the subversion of the holy, the détournement of God, not through the provision of image, of a no longer blind St. Paul in awe of seeing once again, but of a co-creation of an image, image of day.